everyone. Thank you for attending today's seminar. Our guest speaker is Dr. Jian Chen. By the way, she's one of my former supervisors. She's very good. She's currently an assistant professor at the Computer Science and the Electrical Engineering Department at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She leads an interactive visual computing lab and immersive hybrid reality lab at UMBC. She will join our stage this fall, and I know she will do a great job there as always. And please start your talk.
Thank you, Kerching, for the kind introduction. And it's a great honor for me to be here as well to give a talk. So I'm currently on research leave at Harvard to study medical imaging. So you will hear kind of like stories about mostly medical data and bioinformatics data, but I try to associate that data with the work here and see how this works out. So I study visual computing. My work is mainly driven from the user perspective because use-driven research is related to humans. And humans are the active consumers of information, and then computational solutions come up when I collaborate with scientists. I have been actively collaborating with biologists, biomedical scientists, and recently with engineers, physicists, and chemists across the campus and also at NASA. So, okay. So here is what my student called the garden, Chen's garden of research. Can you see that from the back? Okay. Okay. So I call it a garden because it has several plots. And those are the areas I have been addressing in interaction, realization, and metaphor. And under each plot, I gave plant some seeds and plants. Those are the little projects I have been doing in the past. And I have been systematically addressing research questions one by one in those sub-areas. And today, I hope to focus on 4 areas. In the language of visualization, where I want to present a descriptive framework that tells us how we can study visualization and how we can make visualization more accurate. And also, I believe that integrating this in this big data era, and if we want to integrate computational solutions with data analysis, and then knowing when, why, and how to make visual representation more accurate will help scientists to focus on deriving their insight rather than figuring out the uncertainty in the visual piece. So I have this firm belief that visualization needs a theory. So in the past 5 years, I have been actively working with scientists in this biomedical domain to study how brain network functions. And because of that work, I learned that visual accuracy is demanding in many scientific domains, and then visual accuracy is actually fairly low when we run many experiments. And then I try to address this visual accuracy issue while working with physicists at least. And now I'm going to switch gear to tell you novel metaphor interfaces I have been designing in the past, and tell you how we have used this data exploration to help biologists to study this fascinating area of animal flight, as well as gene pathway analysis, which actually part of the Kerching's work while she was working with me. So this is in collaboration with my past advisor at Brown University and with University of Mississippi Medical Center, who want to understand if we have large amount of biomedical brain imaging, how we can study it. to those who don't know, diffusion-tensor MRI basically capture images as slices. And then we perform tensor field analysis. So in a nutshell, it measures how water molecule moves in human brain. Because molecules don't pass the membrane, and by analyzing the structure, we will be able to detect, build an image like this to give the medical doctor some hint on the disease states. So it has been found very useful for studying Alzheimer's diseases and many dementia, as well as brain lesion and tumor. So just to give you an idea, if I'm interested in, say, capturing a pixel in a human brain, and then if you perform the tensor field analysis on the water molecules, you can get 3 different shapes. You can have this elongated tensor shape, which means the water molecules moves primarily along one single direction, or it can move around the plane, which gives you this pancake shape, which I didn't draw on the screen, is this water molecule motion in the human brain in the gray matter area, where the water pretty much diffuses in all directions, then you will get this spherical shape. Because medical doctors are interested in seeing every location on the brain in order in the fear of missing information, so we get really dense images like that. And then we want to say, okay, so I picked this area because medical doctors actually look at this imaging on a daily basis, trying to make diagnostic. I picked this area also because the data density is really high. But if I don't have a visualization theory, and if I don't study it in terms of the feature space, then I won't be able to give good suggestions. So I step back and look into the literature. This is actually from the geospatial data domain, Bertin from French, and then he defined these visual dimensions and told us that, look, if you know this visual dimension in 7 dimensions, you can pretty much compose all visualization you can do in the physical world. So I took, sorry, this is actually, because he's a French, so this is in French and this is in English. So he said, okay, why don't we study position, size, value, texture, color, orientation, and shape? Those are the visual representation, and then if you have the data, you can just map your data to the 7 visual dimensions. Then he gave some example. For example, I can have different texture representation mapped to 1-dimensional data. Or if you study flow field, to study, say, wind flow, you can map to the 2-dimensional data representation. Because this work was published in 1967, so there wasn't really 3D at that time. So map is kind of in between this 2D and 3D representation. And he said you can also change the position, for example. I took this theory also because this theory has been applied in a broader domain in information visualization, where they study, for example, many abstract data. Abstract data, that means they don't have a spatial location for those data points. For example, your bank account. And then you have their gender information, and then all your transactions, but those points don't have spatial data. But if you measure the wind speed, every location has a sample location. So it has been applied to the abstract data, and several PhD theses spin off the Stanford and MIT. They have been building tools to help scientists to look at abstract data. And I try to answer the question, can we use the same theory to study spatial data? And then in the future, if we want to study heterogeneous big data area, and then we have the common theory, we can map the data to a visual representation. So what I did was that I picked several examples. So if you have a flow field, and I guess many of you are actually familiar with this kind of data, so I use a radial basis function. I'm not going to tell you the math to create those visual fields, but you can think of as some flow in the spatial domain, and I can use different visual mapping. These are the common representations. So this is wind's flow direction mapped to color. I can say flow speed mapped to texture. So this one, I can use something called glyphs, which are shapes. So I can use shape to map to a flow speed. And then here, again, color map to direction. Or I can remove color and only use the texture and the size to map to the flow speed. So using this, I demonstrated that you can actually use the same theory to represent 3D spatial data. And then we ran several studies. So in 3D also, because 3D-dimensional data, then you have lighting. So shading or shadow is an important visual dimension. So to those who don't know, there are actually 7 types of shadow in the physical world. So it's very complex, although it's a secondary cue, but those are the shadows that give you visual realism. So adding those dimensions to the 3D representation, that gave me the framework that I can ask research questions. Which is a good visual representation? And then that can guide the design. Before I tell you the story, I'm going to give you a test. So don't shout out the answer and raise your hand when I ask you this question. So the first question is, when you compare the area of these 2 circles, how much larger is the larger one to the smaller one? I will give you a little bit to look at it and look at it carefully. And who think is 4 times bigger? Raise your hand. Sorry for the remote participant because you can't actually see, but I'm going to report the results. So we have about 4 hands up. 5 times bigger? And you look around and hesitate and think, what's my answer? And then seems no hands, 6. Okay, good. So 7.
8.
2 hands, 8. 9. 10. 11 or more. Their hands are not up at all. Okay, then I'm going to give you another encoding. That is by length. And you have the same question. I'm going to ask you to compare the length of the bars and tell me how much longer is a longer bar to the shorter bar. And your answer, 4 times longer? Nobody. Okay, 5 times? 6? 7? More hands. 8. Okay, 9. 10 or more. Okay, so based on this sample in this very small population, and then the answers are actually the same, it's 7. So you can tell, based on this small sample, you can tell that 2 things. One is, by the way, so for the first circle, there are 2 people who answered 7, and for the length, there are 5 who answered, who gave the answer 7. So based on the small sample, you can learn that length is more accurate than circle, than area. If I can derive this type of analytical guidelines, I will be able to dictate software design tools and to provide a more accurate solution to the scientist. Second, visual perception is inaccurate. Our eyes are very different when we look at different visual representation, given this seemingly very simple task. So my research method when looking at more complex visual representation is to say, can I run a series of experiments and use very hypothesis-driven approach? And also my approach mostly different from the rest is that I actually driven the design based on, for example, those attributes, color, texture, the 7 dimension I gave you before. So I will tell you a series of empirical study results. And then I'm not going to give you detail, but I want you to look at one thing. That is a chart that shows you the error rate. And then you will figure out how inaccurate doctors can be. So we ran a series of studies, and then this basically compared the illumination models, and then there was a professor at Harvard who said, okay, you guys need a more accurate visual representation, and then to compare, we compared a series of different illumination models, basically how to set up the lighting. So we gave them spheres to represent cancer data and say whether or not they can detect the relationship between the cancer and the brain structure. And you can look at the error rate, no matter in what condition, the best that you can achieve is around 15% off. So the doctors actually said, okay, it's pretty good because our diagnostic accuracy is 80% and your visual diagnostic accuracy is around the same range. But if you think about it, if they count on this type of visual representation, if you multiply 80% by 80%, you get 64%, which is really bad. And then we also rank visual encoding. So taking the important visual representation that we have mapped this tensor field to visualization, and then we were able to see, okay, so the accuracy here, again, no matter what you study, and then the accuracy is about the same. So we gave them some real-world tasks. So Bertin is also part of the study. So we gave them some visual representation tasks, and their accuracy is about that high. And here we actually compared a whole bunch of visual attributes. Similarly, so we also look at a lot of color mappings. This actually, Kuchin is a leading author on this one. And the accuracy, again, falling into that 80% of range. So we do the study along by comparing each dimension, and we also do the study within each dimension to see what visual mapping gave us the best results. But I got stuck on this inaccurate visual representation, no matter how best the algorithm you have applied. I have also spent a lot of time to look at the functional network. Functional network actually measures the oxygen level in the human brain and study the functional network. So it is a complementary mechanism as the diffusion-tensor MRI, which suggests a structural network. This actually, when the person, even in the resting state or in the when they do some tasks, we measure the brain connectivity. So we took the brain functional network from Cornell University and studied how best to do the visual mapping. So this, for the two-dimensional functional network, the accuracy actually improved significantly in this case. So similarly, you will observe similar pattern where we actually have our medical doctor collaborators to sit in front of the screen, and we didn't find, interestingly, we actually didn't find any benefit of stereoscopic when they look at the medical imaging, although originally we would predict that stereoscopic would introduce a benefit. So I got stuck on, although we published those work and then we think it's actually a good, significant first step that where we can map this visual representation to study, really understand and give a lot of design guidelines in terms of how you should visually present those spatially complex brain data set. But when I work on those data, so the accuracy got me stuck on that. And then I spent a lot of time to work in another domain where we actually collaborate with quantum physicists and study how best we can represent quantum physics experiment. And for this one, I'm going to give you the details how we have done the study. So this quantum simulation was performed by my collaborator and NIST. These are those items and they moves based on, there are structures that you can lay out in the quantum field. It's called quantum dots. And because they can reshape the quantum dots to change the item behaviors, they want to understand how this very dense quantum items actually work structured in this three-dimensional space. So the first problem we had was that the vectors. So you can think about at each location there is a vector. It's called the spin. So it measures the movement as well as the orientation of the atom. So the first problem we had was that it's just very difficult to see any spatial patterns, not because of the density as the TensorFlow data, it's actually because of the large data range. So if you think about the vector length in this very small field, the smallest data, if you map the smallest length to 1 meter, the longest one is actually the distance from the Earth to the Moon.
Could you stop? Excuse me, I can hear someone is typing and also breathing near the microphone. Could you stop it? Yeah, could you, yeah. When you breathe, please stay away from the telephone. And also don't type or mute yourself, all right? Thank you very much. Yeah, I can silent for this mic, but I can hear someone breathing.
Thanks. If you want to ask me a question, feel free to interrupt. I'm perfectly happy with that.
And for the people on the telephone, if you have any question, you can type in chat area. I can monitor. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So this is...
okay. All right. Could you move this one to near the speaker?
What should I do?
Yeah, just people can't hear very well.
Okay, okay.
I move the microphone closer to speaker.
Okay, is it good? Okay, I'll try to be closer. Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a direct mapping I mentioned. So if you see the, so you either see the large structure or you see the small, you won't be able to see both. So we came up with a solution. It's called a split vector. So instead of representing a really large number, and then we use two numbers. So it's a simple mapping from this notation to a scientific notation. Then you have the digit and the exponent term. So instead of representing this really large vector, we show this as 1.2, and then this exponent as 2 leaf representations. Given this simple mapping, and then you will be able to see a few, I'll show you a picture. And then we want to validate whether or not our approach is actually better than either the linear mapping, or many scientists would come up with your solution right away, give me a log, which would shorten the vector significantly, right? So we want to validate our solution to see whether or not it actually improves the accuracy. So we did an empirical study. We used an independent variable, which is an encoding method. We also introduced stereo in the setting. This is because our NIST scientists actually have a virtual reality in their, not far away from their office, and they go there very often and believe that the VR actually would facilitate their understanding of the data. So we also have dependent variable. We measure time error, We also did a sensitivity analysis. I'm going to tell you what that is in a little bit. And then we had 20 participants to use the experiment setting and give us some results. So in the encoding, we compared 4 approaches. So this is a linear approach. So I took a small region in the data. So this is a magnified view of a very small region in the data. So this is a linear mapping where the small would be small, the large would be large. And then this is a log representation, which actually visually look really similar to the split vector representation. So the split vector has, just to remind you, it's an internal 2-cylinder representation. Inside the cylinder shows the digit, outside cylinder mapped to the exponent. And this is a log. We also did a textual display because a lot of time if ask a scientist a number, you say, okay, why don't you just give me the numbers? But remember, text requires conscious reading. That means if I want to know a number, you have to look at that screen consciously, and also it doesn't really give you the pattern finding capabilities. But we have that visual representation if they want to be very accurate to do the visual detection. So we compared these 4 approaches, and we gave them 3 tasks. So the first task is magnitude reading. Basically, I asked them, okay, so what is the magnitude at a certain location? So they have to tell us very precisely what the number is, numerical value. Or the second task is a ratio task where they need to say how much larger, like the task I gave you. By the way, ratio task in all quantitative tasks is the most difficult one. That's why I gave you that difficult test. If I ask you absolute values, it's actually a lot easier than the ratio. This is a simple comparison. Most of the time, you only need to know which one is larger, and then we give them the comparison. So these are 3 different levels of complexity where we ask them to quantitatively study a visualization and tell us the numerical values. So here are the results. So most strikingly, you can see that split vector obtained almost, they are actually in the same group if you do the post hoc analysis. So it's almost as accurate as test. And it's 9 times better than the linear approach. And nearly 6 times better than the log approach in terms of the error. So the relative error is we measure how much off it is to the ground truth in the data. If you look at the time, and also the split vector is significantly better than both the linear and the log approach, although it's not as fast as the text reading. This is partially because we are actually asking them just to read 1 point rather than finding the patterns. So the similar results can be observed for other tasks for the ratio and the task as well. So this magnitude reading, what we did is also what we call sensitivity analysis. That's a measurement how sensitive the visual encoding to different magnitude of your data. So we took 4 levels of magnitude. That is because quantum physicists are actually interested in that range of the data. And then for all other ranges, they consider those as a simulation noise. So we took 4 levels and study how sensitive, whether or not this encoding method would be stable for different encoding approach. You can see this linear approach, actually for small data, it worked really, really well. But when it's become bigger, then it becomes linearly decay. And the log is equally bad for all the conditions. But perhaps more dangerous is that all the scientists, especially those from engineering domain, they all prefer the log when we ask them in the post questionnaire, although it's the least accurate answers. So the split vector and test give very stable results, are less sensitive, the least sensitive to the power in the data we choose in the empirical study. Any questions? This is so quiet. Okay, so and also we studied for a different task, like a racial task. You also can measure for a different power distribution how sensitive they are. You will observe similar effects. So this tells us that our encoding is actually fairly accurate when you try to represent a large range dynamic data which exists in a lot of, for example, wind speed simulation and also in quantum physics data and in a lot of physical science data in the real world. So basically our contribution here is to have a visually accurate representation, and also we quantify the tasks in an empirical study and gave the design guidelines. This already published work. So I said so I gave some visual encoding, and I also said that interaction is really important when you explore the data. And I'm going to switch gear to tell you how we have designed this visual metaphor to help scientists to explore the large motion data set. So this is in collaboration with Microsoft Research and also my former advisor at Brown. So scientists study bat flight in order to understand how to design this micro-air vehicle. So they put the bats in the wind tunnel, and then they want to compare the wind-flow interaction because bats is the only mammal that can fly and is the most powerful flyer in the mammalian kingdom. Actually, it's the only mammal that can fly. So they want to study how this bat morphs its wing during the flight in order to understand the aerodynamic effect of this flyer, so they can design this micro-air vehicle. Many years ago, their published results, they can publish a science or nature paper purely based on this observation of a single flight. So what they do is they say, okay, during the downstroke, which they have a much more curvature, this is called camber. This exists in many airplane design as well. So they say the curvature actually is higher in the downstroke, so it's more aerodynamically effective. And then upstroke, they just try to bring the wing back so you don't get camber. Nowadays, they can capture those type of data on a daily basis. They get terabytes of data, and then they want to analyze it. So they often do is they have the computational solutions to derive the feature, and then they come back to us and say, can you actually visualize the data, because oftentimes I don't see patterns there. So it becomes a very inefficient loop, because in the computational state, there might be errors in the computation, and then they will have to wait for us to complete the visualization sometimes for them to see the errors. So I try to say, okay, can we design an environment that will facilitate scientists to explore their data in a more efficient manner? So I come with a solution that called Vis Bubbles. In a nutshell, it is an organizational framework that integrates the entire workflow from the computational stage to the data to the visual exploration. So I'm going to show you what that is, and I'm going to tell you what the design principle we have applied. So because our scientists and collaborators have a specific way of doing things, they use the MATLAB to do the computing. So what we are doing here is actually give them a MATLAB exploration environment so they can concurrently compare different computational solutions, and each solution become a small working set, and then they can visualize the MATLAB computed results immediately in a visual environment. So in this way, they will be able to quickly inspect the results and compare their results quickly. So what we did is we gave them some good default visual representation based on the data type they have. So they can incorporate the computed data with their original visual representation to have this side-by-side comparison immediately after the computing. So they don't have to go back to us to do that computing. And also, this is an environment that gave them this virtually unlimited pending space, so they can compute different computational solutions in one space. So we actually applied several design principles to allow them to group the data. Sorry, the screen actually has a really low resolution. It's much higher on my screen. So this is, just in case you can't see, this is a visual representation. Those actually computed using the dimensional reduction approach. We're not getting into the computational side again, but they can actually compare different flight on different speed right away. And all those parameters can be added to a new panel. They can interactively explore it. In the space, so windows will be grouped. So when they are grouped, the data will be displayed and visualized together. So by doing this type of visual exploration, it allows the scientists to look at this, their computational solutions and visual solutions right away. And also because a lot of computing, it's very difficult to understand the shape, how the shape morphs during the flight. We also combine this textual programming with the shape plotting to give them interactive means to explore the data. So the whole idea is to really reduce the distance between how humans compute their data to how visualize and make the decisions of their entire exploration process. So I'm actually going to skip this to give you some time to ask questions, but basically we actually use principles to say there are two schemes of how people can be more quickly to make decisions. One is really to driven by memory. For example, if I come here to have a visit, I have this sequential memory to remember the steps that I need to do. So I need to drive here, I need to meet with coaching and set up the display. So those memory actually help us in the data exploration. That's where we integrate the fluid workflow in the exploration space. The second thing is schema. So we make decisions pretty much based on what we have learned in the past. So once we integrate the knowledge we learned in the past, and then we can build this network in our brain that makes us smarter based on the past knowledge. So we have this mechanism built into the entire environment. Now I show this to Andy Van Zan. If you don't know him, he's a creator of the entire graphics domain. And then I told him, okay, I built this wonderful things. What do you think about it? So he said, focus on interaction and really validate the system and tell us why it works. So we were able to build the system, and also they are addressing several design challenges by allowing them to see visual patterns, etc. So and then we haven't really studied why the system works. We basically build the system based on the daily work scientists are doing. So and also this work actually part of the coaching's work. So we use a similar design principles in the biological pathways. So the one of the challenges here is really to understand the larger graphs. So if you think about the graphs, it's actually everywhere. For example, social networks, disease networks. One of my PhD students designed this, what we call the mirror metaphor user interface. When you do the data comparison using a traditional approach, is what I used before, is to use a side-by-side many mini views. So this is called small multiples. But if you do that small multiple display, when you have a really huge data, comparing a data here to another graph is basically the size of your graph. So you need to constantly switch your visual context in order to detect the patterns. So his idea is that why don't we use this mirror metaphor, which means regardless of the size of the graph, so I can, as if I'm walking through a mirror, the other side of the image will become closer. So then the idea is that I can compare any number of large graph structures from the gene pathways and then be able to have this mirror. So those are the mirrors, so we can actually compare the data and by putting them closer to each other. So our contributions in this work is really novel metaphor user interface that allows scientists to interactively explore the data, and also you don't need to delete the data, and all the files can be saved in the XML environment. You can release it to your collaborators or students who can also study the complex exploration process and learn how you have obtained the insights from your data. It allows note-taking, etc. There are many, many other attributes on those as well. So I'm going to skip this. So we're actually currently studying how this mammals swim. So yeah, so the bats not only fly, they can actually swim in water as well, pretty efficiently. So based on what I have done, so what are the future directions I think that are very interesting or I'm currently exploring? So I'm currently working at Harvard Medical School and really trying to understand, can we have more accurate diagnostic method? So Jeremy's lab was able to, so they have been working on breast cancer and lung cancers. So they can actually detect the cancer, breast cancer 3 years before it occurs. So it's not in the used in the clinical setting yet. So it's still a research prototype. But the method he has been using is really study how radiologists actually look for patterns in the imaging. In the past, we have been spending a lot of time looking into, at least in my work, have been looking into the effectiveness of the VR display, effectiveness of coloring and encoding. And currently at Harvard, we're looking into the methodology to see, can we actually integrate this deep learning approach and have this human and computer to collaborate to make better decisions. So we just got started on this, and the first study I did with the vector field just because we can easily create a ground truth without being affected by the medical imaging. So surprisingly, actually the deep learning approach, so we compared several visual representations, and then surprisingly the deep learning approach actually gave you fairly accurate results regardless of the visual representation. Then the question, I think, right now a lot of deep learning approach, they are black box. I'm really interested in answering precisely what this deep learning gave us, what kind of visual features the deep learning would see compared to what humans would see. So when we were at Harvard, actually, interestingly, Jeremy did a study which published in Nature. He put a greta, which is not a normal pattern, and then he found out that the radiologists are not good at detecting patterns that they have never seen before. So certainly radiologists' reaction is that, yeah, I know that, and or I know I don't see that. So they never actually admit they would have errors. So right now the breast cancer detection is the best among all the cancers, but still they have 20% of misses. So we're trying to see, can we actually integrate this deep learning approach with human decision maker and trying to improve the accuracy. It's very hard actually, mostly not from technology perspective, but from the acceptance. Radiologists at Harvard actually, even they won't be waiting to accept the new technology and think the deep learning are going to take away their job, which is not the goal of the deep learning researchers. That's where we're trying to say what are the features that best detected by human? What are the features best detected by the machine? So, which are interesting area. So what we're doing is actually we took a lot of cancer imaging, and I'm trying to do the texture synthesis to create boxes of those data, hopefully with the ground truths that can be used for deep learning training, because we never actually have enough data. And also at Harvard, MIT, they have a new framework which is called GIST. That is on a flash 500 millisecond what human eyes can see. So they actually found out that in the fast flash, they used 50 radiologists, and they figured out they can actually detect certain patterns in the breast cancer imaging as well. So we're looking into all those interesting things. I'm also doing, still continuing the work on the data exploration, trying to study how, if we have heterogeneous data, temporal or even streaming data, then how can we actually visually give them an environment that a human can make decisions based on heterogeneous temporal data. Interestingly, so visualization is different from most of medical imaging because they actually have the images which is fixed. So I'm also interested in looking into, say, if we want to increase a large imaging, increase the size of the display, or actually somehow augmenting the physical imaging, will that allow scientists to make better decisions? So right now, the work here is mainly for educational purpose in the scientific domain. That's what I saw. So so can we actually bring up many imaging techniques here to say if we can encode all those data on a large display, can we actually allow you to see more information there? So this is a new domain, what we call immersive analytics. Basically, if I immerse the user in the domain, so people tend to use their embodied, use their embodiment to facilitate interaction with the data. Can we actually allow to have that big space to augment human thinking in those space? So, of course, I think uncertainty is really important. Surprisingly, if you work with, I have been working with medical doctors for many years. They have never asked me if I have, computational uncertainty, although it's a computational uncertainty existing in the data. So how can we actually represent those? So I know Christian has worked on data uncertainty using this geometry, for example, contour approach to represent uncertainty. How can we, for two-dimensional data, sometimes it's a lot easier to map this uncertainty, but for three-dimensional imaging, how can we better to represent this uncertainty? Although medical doctor actually never asked that question, they just believe what we have computed. Excuse me. So I'm very enthusiastic about different display techniques, like I said. So this is actually FUMBC, so I can't take it with me, but you know, you can chat with people there. They're still faculty. So this is funded by Natural Science Foundation. So this is the highest resolution you can get in the world. So if you stand in the center of the display, the resolution is actually higher than your visual accuracy. That means you can put very fine level detail and much more data in this visual display compared to your desktop. So I'm also interested in a lot of different modality to have input. That being said, so I thank my collaborators and many students. You can see the young Bertin there. And I thank Bertin for hosting it, and thanks Chico for setting up. And so I've been lucky in getting funding for fund research in the past. And I thank you for your attention.
So I was wondering that when you mentioned the least accurate by one measure visualization was the log scale, and that's the one the engineers preferred. Did you tell them that after they said that's the one I preferred, did you tell them it was also the least accurate, and how did they respond?
Yeah, so our collaborator was, so at least I did tell my collaborator that's a result. So he was totally surprised. He thought, because he used log on a daily basis, he thought he was very, accurate in terms of log. But that's definitely not the case with many other science. We didn't use our collaborator, apparently. We used the students from the physics department and some of the senior